The ink barely dried before miners flooded into the Black Hills. The U.S. had promised them to the Sioux absolute and undisturbed use. Then Custer rode in, and gold rewrote the deal. Treaties weren't peace, they were pauses. The location later designated Fort Laramie held significance long before military engineers surveyed its perimeters or soldiers raised a flag. It was, and remained, a geographical and cultural nexus, its importance etched into the landscape by millennia of human passage and congregation, predating European arrival by thousands of years. The specific terrain at the confluence of the Laramie River and the North Platte River functioned as a natural focal point. This was not merely a convenient meeting of waters. It was a critical juncture, a seasonal encampment and resource area for numerous indigenous groups whose tenure stretched back into deep prehistory. Geographically, the Fort Laramie site occupied a position of undeniable strategic and practical advantage. Its precise placement at the juncture where the Laramie River discharges into the larger North Platte created a readily identifiable landmark and a hub for movement. Furthermore, this area marked a distinct topographical transition. The vast, rolling Central Plains give way here to the initial foothills of the Laramie Mountains, themselves an eastern range of the Rocky Mountain system. This juxtaposition of plains and mountain environments concentrated diverse ecological resources, offering access to bison herds of the grasslands, timber from the hills, and varied flora and fauna from both zones. The confluence acted as a natural funnel for animal migrations and, consequently, for human hunting and travel. This geographical configuration directly influenced the alignment of historic trails and fundamentally shaped the site's enduring role as a place of passage and assembly, contributing to its unique historical trajectory. Archaeological investigations within the boundaries of what became Fort Laramie National Historic Site and across the broader high plains of Wyoming and southeastern Nebraska have yielded substantial evidence of this protracted human presence. Artifacts and site features confirm continuous or recurring occupation spanning a period of at least 10,000 and potentially as far back as 12,000 years, initiating in the Paleo-Indian period. Excavated materials include distinctive fluted projectile points, such as Clovis and Folsom types, associated with the hunting of now-extinct megafauna. Subsequent strata reveal tools and debitage from the Archaic period, indicating a shift towards broader-spectrum foraging and the hunting of modern bison, alongside evidence from later woodland and plains village occupations. These findings lithic scatters, butchering sites, fire hearths, and remnants of temporary shelters collectively demonstrate a persistent human adaptation to the challenges and opportunities of this specific riverine environment over countless generations. The accumulated archaeological record offers a silent testament to the region's deep history as a lived-in, utilized, and culturally significant landscape. For these thousands of years preceding European contact, the confluence served as a vital destination and interaction sphere for a considerable array of Native American tribes. Groups such as the Lakota, Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Assiniboine, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara regularly traversed this territory. They came to hunt bison and other game, to gather plant resources, to trade goods and information amongst themselves, and to conduct important social and ceremonial activities. By the early 19th century, as European and American explorers and traders began to penetrate the region with greater frequency, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho had emerged as the dominant political and military powers in the vicinity of the future fort. The complex tapestry of these intertribal relationships and their respective territorial claims is reflected in the diverse participation at later treaty councils, notably the Horse Creek Treaty of 1851, which convened numerous representatives from these nations. The Laramie Mountains and the adjacent plains were, and in many ways remain, the ancestral homelands of several of these peoples, including bands of the Eastern Shoshone and the various divisions of the Oceti-Sakowing, the Great Sioux Nation. This area was far more than a simple geographical meeting point. It functioned as a dynamic cultural crucible for millennia. It was a place where distinct linguistic groups and cultural traditions intersected, fostering an ongoing exchange of material goods, technological innovations, practical knowledge of the environment, and social customs. These interactions, ranging from amicable trade and alliance building to periods of competition and conflict, forged a sophisticated network of intertribal relations and mutual understanding. Indeed, rivalry long before Fort Laramie was conceived as a fur trading post or a military garrison. This pre-existing social and economic landscape would profoundly influence the nature and development of those later European and American enterprises. Even in the contemporary era, Fort Laramie National Historic Site continues its legacy as a point of convergence, drawing visitors from across the globe. These individuals arrived not only to examine the preserved 19th century structures, but also to engage with the complex, multi-layered history of the American West, a history defined by the encounters, collaborations, and violent collisions of cultures that shaped this pivotal region. The fort encapsulates a microcosm of these broader historical processes. The sheer diversity of cultures that met, interacted, and frequently clashed with intensity at Fort Laramie over the centuries is central to its narrative. From the original Native American inhabitants with their ancient ties to the land, to the European and American fur trappers and traders seeking wealth from its faunal resources, to the waves of immigrants journeying towards new lives in the West, to the United States soldiers tasked with implementing federal policy, and later, to miners and permanent settlers, each group brought its own objectives, values, and practices. These interactions were multifaceted. Commercial transactions that defined early cross-cultural relationships, critical treaty negotiations that redrew maps and redefined sovereignties, armed confrontations that resulted in significant loss of life, and more subtle yet profound instances of cultural exchange. It was precisely this convergence of disparate aims, conflicting worldviews, and consequential actions that forged the unique and intricate story of Fort Laramie. The site became a stage upon which the grand historical, economic, and social forces driving westward expansion played out with dramatic effect. A primary and continually emphasized objective in the modern interpretation of Fort Laramie's history is the comprehensive, accurate, and respectful integration of Native American experiences, perspectives, and contributions into the broader narrative of the site and the region. This involves a conscious effort to recognize their central and active agency in shaping the events that transpired, moving beyond portrayals that might cast them merely as passive bystanders or victims of inexorable forces. Centering Indigenous voices and viewpoints allows for the construction of a more complete, nuanced, and equitable historical understanding. The enduring importance of this specific location, from deep prehistory through the historic period and into the present day, underscores how fundamental geographical factors made it a significant locus for diverse peoples pursuing varied objectives over thousands of years. It was not simply a site discovered and subsequently transformed by European newcomers, but an ancient ground imbued with layers of human meaning and activity. In the opening decades of the 19th century, long before United States Army blue uniforms became a common sight, or the sound of bugle calls echoed across the valley, the confluence that would eventually host Fort Laramie had already asserted itself as a fur trading locus of considerable importance. Initially established as a private commercial enterprise in 1834, this remote outpost rapidly evolved into a vital hub of economic activity, drawing a diverse assembly of Euro-American trappers, traders, and indigenous peoples from across the northern plains and the Rocky Mountain interior. Its early success was not accidental, but was firmly rooted in its geography and its integration into pre-existing indigenous trade networks. The strategic positioning of this early trading post, directly at the confluence of the Laramie River and the North Platte River, conferred an immediate and substantial natural advantage. This junction provided a reliable water source and, more critically, formed a natural crossroads. The river systems offered pathways for canoe and boat traffic carrying goods and pelts, while the overland routes converging at this point facilitated movement for pack trains and, later, wagon parties. This accessibility from multiple directions was fundamental to sustaining a large-scale trading operation in such an isolated region. Trading activities at the site were complex and multi-layered. They were not confined to simple exchanges between Euro-American traders and Native American suppliers. Various indigenous tribes, who possessed long-established traditions of intertribal commerce, also utilized this strategic location for their own exchanges of goods, horses, and information. With the arrival of European and American traders, this existing network expanded and adapted. Tribes such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho frequently established substantial temporary encampments in the vicinity of the post to engage in trade, integrating the new manufactured goods into their economies and material cultures. The primary commodities in the initial phase of the trade centered on beaver pelts, a luxury item in high demand for hat production in Europe and the eastern United States. However, as beaver populations dwindled due to overtrapping and as fashion trends shifted in the late 1830s, processed bison robes, buffalo hides, tanned and often decorated by native women, swiftly ascended to become the principal currency of the trade. Indigenous hunters and processors exchanged these valuable robes for a range of manufactured items: woolen blankets, bolts of cloth, tobacco, sugar, coffee, glass beads, metal tools and utensils such as knives, axes, and cooking pots, and, of critical importance for subsistence and warfare, gunpowder, lead balls, and flint. Alcohol, though often officially discouraged or prohibited by government policy or company directives, also frequently entered the trade, often with detrimental social consequences for native communities. During the zenith of the Northern Plains fur trade, roughly from the early 1830s through the early 1840s, the individuals involved, including the semi-legendary mountain men who trapped independently or in small brigades, alongside agents of powerful fur companies like the American Fur Company, often spent considerable periods in the Fort Laramie vicinity. Traders would typically arrive in the spring, having transported their inventory of goods overland or by river from St. Louis and other eastern depots. The main trading season, known as the rendezvous system in some regions, or post-based trade here, occurred throughout the summer and early autumn. By late fall, tons of accumulated furs and robes would begin their journey eastward before the harsh high plains winter closed transportation routes. The first permanent structure, Fort William, a stockaded log enclosure, was erected in 1834 by William Sublette and Robert Campbell. This was later superseded by Fort John, a more substantial adobe-walled structure built nearby around 1841 by the American Fur Company to consolidate its regional dominance. These extended encounters were not solely transactional. They inevitably fostered opportunities for social communication and deeper cultural interaction between groups with vastly different origins and lifeways. Personal relationships formed, sometimes leading to intermarriage between Euro-American traders and indigenous women. These unions often served practical purposes for the traders, such as securing trade partnerships, access to local knowledge, and assistance with pelt preparation, but they also created bicultural families and transient communities that played a complex role in shaping frontier society. Simultaneously, these interactions were not without friction or negative outcomes, including the introduction of European diseases and the aforementioned disruptive effects of the alcohol trade. The early nomenclature of the post reflects its ownership and evolution. Fort William, established by Sublette and Campbell in 1834, represented the initial phase of fixed-post trading at the confluence. By 1836, ownership had transferred to the formidable American Fur Company, the dominant force in the Western fur trade. To counter rival traders and address the deterioration of the original wooden stockade, the American Fur Company initiated the construction of a new, more durable fort using sun-dried adobe bricks circa 1841. This structure was officially named Fort John, in honor of John Sarpy, a prominent partner in the company. Despite this official designation, the name Fort Laramie, derived from the river, persisted in common usage among trappers, traders, and travelers. As the tide of westward migration swelled dramatically in the mid-1840s and 1850s, with emigrants traversing the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails, the function of Fort Laramie underwent another significant transformation. It evolved into an indispensable stopover, an oasis of civilization, as perceived by many weary travelers, amidst the vast and challenging wilderness. Here, emigrant parties could rest, effect crucial repairs to their wagons, seek rudimentary medical attention, and, most importantly, replenish vital supplies such as foodstuffs, ammunition, and other necessities for the arduous journey still ahead. During peak migration years, such as 1849 and 1850, tens of thousands of individuals passed through the Fort Laramie corridor annually, placing immense strain on local resources but also reinforcing the site's strategic importance. The most decisive shift in Fort Laramie's history occurred in the 18th of June 49, recognizing the post's critical location for protecting the burgeoning overland trails and for asserting federal authority in the region. The United States Army negotiated its purchase from the American Fur Company for the sum of $4,000. Lieutenant Daniel P. Woodbury of the Corps of Engineers oversaw the transaction. With this acquisition, Fort Laramie was officially designated a United States military post, and its purpose was profoundly reshaped. It transitioned from a center of private commerce to a key instrument of federal policy on the plains. Its new mandate included affording protection to emigrant trains, serving as a forward base for military operations against hostile or non-compliant indigenous groups, acting as a logistical hub for Army campaigns, and functioning as a significant venue for treaty negotiations with Plains tribes. This transformation mirrored a broader trend across the West: the decline of the largely unregulated fur trade economy and the concomitant rise of federal power aimed at facilitating Euro-American settlement and resource exploitation on an ever-expanding scale. The fort, once a place where indigenous peoples held considerable leverage as trading partners, now became a symbol and an agent of a new and more assertive sovereign power. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 was a critical agreement, but not the first to bear the fort's name. 17 years prior, in 1851, another significant pact, commonly known as the Horse Creek Treaty, or the First Fort Laramie Treaty, was concluded. These two treaties were central to the evolving and often contentious relationship between the United States government and the indigenous nations of the Northern Plains. The 1851 agreement, though often called the Fort Laramie Treaty, convened at Horse Creek, approximately 30 to 40 miles east of the fort, due to logistical demands. An estimated 10,000 members of the Lakota, Oglala and Brule Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Assiniboine, Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, and a notable Shoshone contingent gathered done of the largest such intertribal councils with U.S. representatives. The treaty's stated aims were to establish intertribal peace, define general tribal territorial zones, a concept not always aligned with indigenous land use customs, and secure safe passage for U.S. emigrants on the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails. In return, the U.S. pledged annuities. Initially proposed for 50 years, the U.S. Senate unilaterally reduced this term to 10 years, extendable by 5, a modification poorly communicated to many tribes. Indigenous decision-making for such treaties relied on achieving internal consensus after extensive deliberation, a process often misunderstood by U.S. officials accustomed to quicker representative signing authority. This cultural disconnect frequently led U.S. negotiators to secure signatures from a few designated chiefs, without fully appreciating that these leaders required broader community accord for the terms to be truly binding within their nations, thus laying groundwork for future disputes. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 involved a more fragmented signing process, occurring on various dates between the 29th of April and the 18th of November 68 at Fort Laramie and nearby locations. Different bands of the Sioux, Brule, Oglala, Miniconjou, Yanktonai, Hunkpapa, Sihasapa, Itazipko, Uhanumpa, and Santee, and representatives of the Arapaho signed at different times. The Oglala Lakota leader Red Cloud was among the last. In November, after the U.S. Army agreed to abandon forts along the Bozeman Trail. The Crow pursued a separate treaty at Fort Laramie during this period. Tribal delegations arrived to meet the U.S. Indian Peace Commission, whose objectives were to end ongoing conflicts, notably Red Cloud's War, 1866 to 1868, over the Bozeman Trail leading to Montana goldfields, and to persuade tribes onto reservations. Negotiations often occurred along the Laramie River, near traditional teepee encampments. Key provisions of the 1868 treaty included the establishment of the Great Sioux Reservation for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Sioux, encompassing the sacred Black Hills in Dakota Territory. The U.S. committed to closing the Bozeman Trail forts and providing rations, clothing, and supplies intended to transition the Sioux towards agriculture and a civilized life, including schools. Critically, Article 12 stipulated that any future cession of reservation land required the consent of at least 3/4 of adult Sioux male members. While these treaties formally acknowledged tribes as sovereign entity, a basis for ongoing rights claims, they also initiated the drastic curtailment of traditional indigenous lifeways by imposing fixed reservations and promoting assimilationist policies, often through coercive means such as government-run schools where native languages and cultures were suppressed. The imbalance of power and understanding in negotiations rendered these agreements deeply problematic, viewed by many as instruments of both limited recognition and profound dispossession. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, like many U.S. indigenous agreements, soon fell victim to the pattern of broken promises. The U.S. government frequently disregarded its commitments when they impeded economic ambitions or territorial expansion. The pledge to protect the Great Sioux Reservation, clearly defined by the 1868 treaty to include the sacred Black Hills, proved fragile. This enduring issue was highlighted in a 2018 resolution marking the treaty's 150th anniversary, urging the U.S. federal government to uphold its treaty obligations. Respect for the reservation's boundaries eroded quickly. The westward push of settlers and, decisively, the discovery of gold in the Black Hills led to direct treaty violations. Rumors of gold circulated shortly after the 1868 signing, but the rush began in earnest in the summer of 1874, following Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Following its acquisition by the United States Army in 1849 and until its decommissioning in 1890, Fort Laramie underwent a fundamental transformation from a bustling fur trading nexus to a paramount strategic military installation on the northern Great Plains. The daily existence within its confines was distinct, shaped by the raw conditions of the frontier, the unyielding demands of military discipline, and the intricate, often tense, interactions among its diverse inhabitants. This period established the fort not just as a military presence, but as a complex micro-society reflecting the broader dynamics of westward expansion. For the common enlisted man, service at Fort Laramie was typically an arduous experience marked by monotony, stringent regulation, and pervasive, if intermittent, danger. Daily routines were severe. A historical reconstruction based on soldiers' lives in the 18th of April 78, for instance, depicts a day filled with grim duties such as excavating graves for fallen comrades, participating in funeral processions, and the grim necessity of witnessing disciplinary actions like the flogging of a deserter. This was not a life of heroic engagement for most, but one of hard labor and stark realities. A significant portion of these enlisted personnel were recent immigrants, hailing from the industrial cities of the northeastern United States or directly from European nations, particularly Ireland and Germany. Often originating from impoverished working-class backgrounds, they faced limited employment prospects elsewhere. For many, enlisting in the Army represented an option of last resort, or the only viable path to secure a livelihood, however meager. The decision was frequently driven by economic necessity rather than patriotic fervor or a desire for martial adventure. Deployment to a remote and isolated post like Fort Laramie constituted a profound shock for many new recruits. They were thrust into a natural environment radically different from anything they had previously encountered. The high plains climate presented formidable challenges. Winters were characterized by bitter, penetrating cold, while summers brought scorching heat and arid conditions. Barracks accommodations were frequently overcrowded, with sanitation often falling short of adequate standards. The diet was typically monotonous and nutritionally deficient, consisting largely of salted meats, hardtack, and coffee, further contributing to the physical hardships of military life and the prevalence of ailments like scurvy or dysentery. The daily rhythm of an enlisted man's life was entirely governed by a highly structured and repetitive schedule of military duties. From dawn until dusk, their movements and activities were dictated by a strict regimen. This included unit parades, formations on the cavalry, barracks, porch for mounted troops, and near-constant drills focusing on military formations, weapons proficiency with firearms like the Springfield rifle or Colt revolver, and basic combat tactics. A substantial portion of their time was also consumed by manual labor essential to the fort's operation, cleaning barracks and stables, performing guard duty at various posts, tending to the vital needs of cavalry horses and transport mules, and undertaking other auxiliary tasks such as construction, repair, or woodcutting details. For many soldiers, life at such a distant frontier outpost descended into profound boredom and a stultifying lack of diverse social interaction or meaningful recreation. The sense of isolation, both geographical and cultural, and the feeling of being detached from the civilized world they had left behind, imposed a considerable psychological burden. The bugle call was the omnipresent, inescapable sound that orchestrated every aspect of their existence. From the first notes of reveille at dawn until the final call of taps at night, the bugle dictated precisely when and where soldiers needed to be, and what tasks they were to perform. It was the unyielding, iron metronome of their long and often tedious days. Given these conditions, it is unsurprising that desertion rates and the failure to re-enlist among enlisted men at Fort Laramie and similar frontier posts were exceptionally high, reportedly reaching as much as 50% during certain periods. This figure starkly reflected the severity of military life and the pervasive dissatisfaction among the ranks. Soldiers who chose to desert employed various methods to escape army control. Some took considerable risks by attempting to integrate into westward-bound emigrant wagon trains, hoping to disappear and forge new lives. Others, perhaps more desperate or audacious, absconded individually or in small groups, facing the myriad dangers of the wilderness and the possibility of pursuit by military patrols or encounters with hostile parties. The motivations for desertion were diverse and complex. Some soldiers were undoubtedly lured by persistent rumors of newly discovered goldfields in California, Colorado, or other Western territories, imagining a quick path to fortune. Others harbored dreams of acquiring their own land for farming in Oregon or other developing regions, seeking an independent agrarian life. For many, however, the primary impetus was simply an inability to endure further the harsh, often perceived as pointless, and frequently unjust conditions of military service on the frontier. In stark contrast to the grim realities faced by the enlisted ranks, the experience of an officer stationed at Fort Laramie was typically of a markedly different character. For the commissioned officer class, service at Western frontier posts was generally viewed as an integral and professionally valuable component of their military careers. It offered opportunities to demonstrate leadership capabilities, accumulate practical command experience in challenging operational environments, and potentially secure advancement in rank and status. Many young and ambitious officers either volunteered for or willingly accepted assignments to the West, driven by the prospect of accelerating their careers and building a reputation through successful participation in military campaigns or by competently executing demanding duties. The frontier was seen as a proving ground. Officers generally enjoyed significantly better living conditions than the common soldiers. They were often assigned private or more spacious accommodations, such as dedicated officers' quarters or rooms within the prominent Old Bedlam building. If married, many officers were permitted to have their families, wives, and children reside with them at the fort, fostering a small but distinct community of military families. It was also common practice for officers to employ enlisted men as strikers or orderlies, who performed domestic tasks such as cooking, cleaning, and personal attendance, a perquisite that further underscored the disparity in status and comfort between officers and enlisted personnel. An officer's responsibilities were primarily managerial and strategic. They included commanding and administering their assigned units, planning and supervising the training of their soldiers, implementing orders received from higher command, maintaining discipline and good order within the garrison, and, on occasion, participating in diplomatic engagements or negotiations with Native American leaders. The social life available to officers was also considerably richer and more varied than that of the enlisted men. They participated in social gatherings, formal dinners, parties, and other forms of entertainment, which frequently took place within the relatively more comfortable confines of Old Bedlam or in the private residences of senior officers. The human population at Fort Laramie was not static. It fluctuated considerably based on the season, the prevailing regional security situation, and the number and size of military units garrisoned at the post at any given time. During peak periods, particularly in conjunction with major military campaigns or when large emigrant trains made extended stopovers, the combined population of the fort and its immediate surroundings could swell to several thousand individuals. This figure encompassed not only military personnel and their dependents, but also a significant contingent of civilian employees working for the Army, such as blacksmiths, wheelwrights, carpenters, teamsters, and mail carriers, private traders and sutlers, various service providers, and sometimes large encampments of Native Americans present for trade, treaty negotiations, or the distribution of annuities. As a pivotal military outpost, Fort Laramie served as a crucial staging area where military units from disparate locations would converge. Here, they would reorganize, receive reinforcements and fresh supplies, undergo intensive training or refitting, and make final preparations for launching military campaigns or expeditions into external areas. The objectives of these campaigns were typically to suppress Native American resistance deemed hostile by the government, to protect transportation routes and Euro-American settlements from attack, or to enforce federal policies related to the confinement of indigenous populations onto designated reservations. The fort was thus a dynamic hub of military logistics and offensive planning. An indispensable institution at any major Western military post was the sutler store, known as the Post Trader Store, after 1868. This was a privately owned enterprise, operated by a civilian, under a license granted by the military. The store at Fort Laramie played an exceptionally vital role in provisioning not only the soldiers and officers with goods, daily necessities, and sundry luxuries not provided by Army quartermasters, but also emigrants, civilian travelers, and other residents of the region. The inventory of the sutler's store was remarkably diverse, reflecting the manifold needs of an isolated frontier community. Goods ranged from basic personal hygiene items, canned foods, flour, sugar, salt, and coffee, to tobacco, candy, biscuits, and various forms of alcohol. Also available were blankets, clothing, footwear, hats, assorted tools, axes, shovels, hammers, personal firearms and ammunition primarily for civilian hunting, or self-defense, saddles, harnesses, and other equestrian accoutrements. Transactions at the store were conducted through various means to accommodate the economic realities of its diverse clientele. Cash was the primary medium, but credit systems were widely utilized, especially for soldiers. Bartering also occurred, particularly between the store and Native American customers, who might exchange traditional products like tanned hides, buffalo robes, handcrafted items, or hunted game for manufactured goods such as colored glass beads, bright textiles, metal implements, or processed foodstuffs. For enlisted soldiers, purchasing items on credit was a common practice. The post trader meticulously recorded their debts and subsequently informed the post quartermaster or paymaster, who would then deduct the outstanding amounts directly from the soldier's monthly wages before disbursement. While this system ensured payment for the trader, it also frequently mired soldiers in cycles of debt. The store's goods were primarily sourced from commercial and manufacturing centers in the eastern or midwestern United States. These supplies were transported to the fort via large, animal-drawn wagon trains, a journey covering hundreds, sometimes thousands, of arduous and perilous miles. Later, as the railroad network extended westward, some goods were shipped by rail to the nearest terminuses and then freighted by wagon to Fort Laramie. The sutler's store was more than a mere retail outlet. It was a crucial economic and social nexus, linking the fort to the broader national economy and the outside world. Among the many structures that once stood at Fort Laramie, the building known as Old Bedlam holds a particularly distinctive and symbolic status. Constructed in 1849, shortly after the Army's acquisition of the post, Old Bedlam is recognized as one of the oldest surviving military-built structures in Wyoming. Initially, it was designed and utilized as quarters for the fort's bachelor officers. Over the ensuing decades, its function evolved. At times, it served as the central administrative headquarters for the post, housing offices for record-keeping and management. At other periods, it was subdivided into apartments to accommodate the families of married officers and senior non-commissioned officers. The unique moniker, Old Bedlam, implying a place of chaos or an asylumus, reputed to have originated from the lively and often boisterous atmosphere created by the frequent social gatherings, dances, and parties hosted within its walls, particularly when young, unattached officers congregated for entertainment and camaraderie. However, despite its prominent role and somewhat imposing facade, Old Bedlam was not a paragon of robust construction. Historical accounts and personal reminiscences from those who resided there indicate that the building, a two-story wood-frame structure, had thin walls and numerous gaps, rendering it extremely drafty and frigid during Wyoming's harsh winters. Conversely, in summer, its interior spaces became oppressively hot and stuffy. This condition reflected the significant difficulties and material limitations inherent in constructing and maintaining substantial facilities at remote frontier outposts, where quality building materials and skilled labor were often scarce and expensive. Old Bedlam, with its varied history and structural imperfections, thus stands as a tangible symbol of the adaptability, the inherent transience, and the vibrant, if often challenging, nature of life on the western frontier. Fort Laramie's active military service concluded in the 18th of March 90 with its official decommissioning by the United States Army. This event reflected the declared closing of the American western frontier, diminishing the strategic role of such outposts. Subsequently, the fort's buildings and lands were auctioned to homesteaders and other private citizens, opening the former military reservation to civilian settlement and agriculture. Surprisingly, the initial preservation of many fort structures was due to these new civilian owners, who repurposed buildings for homes, barns, businesses, and even community gathering spots like hotels and saloons. This continuous use, despite alterations, saved numerous historic edifices from complete ruin. Recognizing its immense historical value, preservation efforts grew, leading to Fort Laramie's designation as a national monument in 1938. After Wyoming acquired and donated part of the site to the federal government, its status was elevated to National Historic Site in 1960. When the National Park Service, NPS, assumed management, many key structures, though weathered, provided a sound basis for professional restoration. Today, Fort Laramie is acclaimed as one of the most comprehensively preserved 19th-century frontier military posts in the U.S. National Park System, with 11 principal structures restored to their period appearance, complemented by numerous stabilized ruins. NPS preservation techniques have evolved, now prioritizing historically authentic materials like lime mortar, with local Laramie river sand over previously used modern materials, ensuring greater structural integrity and historical accuracy. A significant commemorative event occurred in 2018, marking the 150th anniversary of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. Its purpose was not celebratory, but to honor the enduring spirit of sovereign native nations and their persistent efforts to maintain their cultures, languages, and traditions, affirming "we are still here." The NPS collaborated closely with tribal representatives to honestly acknowledge the original treaty intentions and the severe lasting negative impacts of the broken treaty on native communities. This partnership sought to foster constructive dialogue and reconciliation. The term commemorate was deliberately chosen over celebrate to respect the painful aspects of the treaty's legacy for Native Americans. The events aimed to highlight the vibrancy of contemporary Native cultures, despite historical adversities, with sessions like "We Are Here," struggles, and multi-generational impacts. The anniversary resolution also emphasized that Native Americans are active, contributing members of modern society, and underscored the urgent need for the U.S. to uphold its treaty obligations and maintain respectful government-to-government relations with tribal nations. Indigenous perspectives on the 1868 treaty are complex and varied. For some, despite its flaws and violations, the treaty remains a crucial legal document acknowledging past tribal sovereignty. For many more, however, its signing and subsequent abrogation marked a devastating, forced alteration of their way of life, involving massive land cessions, confinement to reservations, and aggressive assimilation policies. Despite centuries of detrimental federal actions, from forced removals and assimilationist boarding schools to policies aimed at terminating tribal status, Native nations have remarkably persisted in asserting their cultural identities and self-determination. The Fort Laramie area continues to be a vital site for historical and archaeological research. Efforts persist to precisely locate the original 1834 wooden Fort William. Excavations have revealed foundations of early structures, adding to the rich archaeological record, which includes Paleo-Indian sites, historic Native encampments, fur trade post remnants, the extensive military fort complex, and later homesteader sites. Contemporary research also focuses on collecting and honoring oral histories and family narratives from descendants of Native individuals affected by the treaties, illuminating the multi-generational impacts. Fort Laramie National Historic Site curates extensive archives and collections invaluable for research. The name file contains data on approximately 36,000 to 40,000 individuals connected to the fort's history. The artifact collection includes over 300,000 cataloged items. These resources, along with a specialized library, are available to researchers and the public. The park also conducts educational programs, including one for Wyoming fourth graders. During summer months, living history programs with costumed interpreters, along with ranger talks and black powder demonstrations, enrich the visitor experience. Visitors are encouraged to begin at the Visitor Center for orientation. Fort Laramie National Historic Site grounds are open year-round, from sunrise to sunset. Visitor Center and historic building hours vary seasonally. Typically, summer hours are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., sometimes later, while other seasons may see closures around 4:30 p.m. Always verify current hours via the official park website nps.gov/FOLA or by phone. The site is near U.S. Highway 26 in Goshen County, Wyoming, accessible from Interstate 25, exit 92 north of Wheatland. Essential services like restaurants, gas, and lodging are not available on site. These can be found in nearby towns such as Fort Laramie, 3 miles east, Lingle, Torrington, and Guernsey. A visit of at least 2 to 3 hours is recommended, with comfortable walking shoes. Be prepared for Wyoming's variable weather. Fort Laramie encapsulates a pivotal era of American expansion, a place of profound cultural meetings and enduring conflicts. Its preserved landscape and structures offer a direct connection to the peoples and events that shaped the West, prompting reflection on a complex national inheritance. Which historical period or individual associated with Fort Laramie would you be interested in examining more closely?